may be seated. I just want to take a moment just to look around. It's so nice to see everybody here. Just want to sweep across. Those of you used to sitting on that bima year after year, you're back up there. It's good to see you. All of you around here, everybody back in their same seats just about. Isn't that funny? After 2.5, 3 years now. When you bring back your children from college and post-college, and you bring the grandchildren, I did your bar mitzvah here, now you bring kids here, like what's going on? You know? Thank you for that. I'll take care of you afterwards. Oh, I'm going to be in trouble. Do you wonder, and a serious question, do you wonder what stories will be told about the pandemic 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now? How will it be remembered? Will it be about the people who died? Right? 6.5 million worldwide, more than 1 million here in the United States. Will be perhaps instead the story of the political divide over vaccinations and masks that fractured our society, our families? Will it be second guessing about how it should have been handled, or will it be simply gratitude for those of us who survived? On this Rosh Hashanah, 2.5 years into the pandemic, where are we? For the last 2 years, I've tried to make sense of it. So some of you may remember 2 years ago when you were all on live streaming. I said that we can't make sense of it until it's over. And then last year, with some of you here and most of you still out there, I spoke about not returning to a normal or even a new normal, that there perhaps was no such thing as normal or new normal. Where are we this year? Our synagogue theme is return. Some of you might have seen actually the beautiful display up on the stairs as you came up, arranged by Shay Dingfelder, who is our new communications marketing director, did a brilliant job of responding and sharing the things that you shared with us about what does it mean to return. So where are we this year in this theme of return? Well, my newest metaphor for the pandemic is the story of Noah and the flood. Noah is told by God to build an ark for his family and the animals. God tells Noah that the world is corrupt and lawless and that Noah and his family will create a new society. The Torah describes in these words, quote, "The fountains of the deep and floodgates of the sky, they were opened." I don't know about you, but that's what the beginning of the pandemic felt like for me. That whoosh that came. You see, Noah had 7 days to load up his ark. We didn't have that long, did we? Noah and his family forced into their ark. And we were forced into what I call the COVID ark. How does the rest of the biblical story continue? What comparisons can we lend and learn in our own time? And most importantly, what can we take from it? The biblical narrative continues to describe how it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Have you ever been in rain 40 days and 40 nights? We dream about that here in California. But by the way, in places and around the world, that could mean flooding. Terrible flooding that we've experienced lately. And so 40 days and 40 nights of rain, enough to wipe out all of humanity. 150 days after that, the ark finally rests on Mount Ararat. But there's no land to be seen yet. At the end of 40 more days, Noah sends out the raven, nowhere to go. 7 days later, a dove, nowhere to go, comes back. 7 days later, another dove brings back that olive branch. 7 days later, another dove, and this time doesn't return. But in truth, by the way, even though that the world was now habitable for birds, it was still not habitable for human beings. So you may not know this part, but it's actually another 220 days until they leave the ark, until the water subsides sufficiently for them to leave that ark. What are the similarities to our own experience in the last 2.5 years? Like Noah's neighbors who refused to believe that the flood was coming, we as a nation we refuse to believe that the pandemic would hit us. Remember that? So with warnings of a COVID flood coming in from Europe, from China, our American exceptionalism had us believe that we were immune from these afflictions. Our science is better than theirs. We're going to be okay. Don't worry. It's a midrash, a rabbinic tradition in the Talmud that tells us that it took Noah 120 years to build the ark. Now, by the way, when you live to be 960, 120 isn't a whole lot of time. But 120 years. Now, why was he given 120 years to build it? So that people would actually ask him, what are you doing? And he would tell them, I'm building a flood because God is going to punish humanity. The hope was that they would repent. But we're humans, and we don't repent so easily. God was going to give humanity a chance, and we didn't take it. Instead of 120 years, we only had weeks to assimilate the implications of the COVID flood. And then what happened instead? Conservatives and liberals argued about how best to build a COVID ark, or whether we needed one at all. Then March 13th, 2020, you know this date, the COVID ark was closed up tight. Noah and his family actually had a choice about whether to get on that ark, but we didn't, did we? You were all pushed into that COVID ark. The CDC, the government agencies shut the ark up tight. Only essential personnel were allowed out or for essential trips. The Torah tells us that the sins of Noah's generation was lawlessness and immorality. In our time, there's many sins, but I want to tell you what I consider the greatest sin is that we politicize everything. And in the COVID flood, it became even worse. Everything was politicized. Conservatives and liberals blamed each other for the sins of our society, never taking time to do some self-reflection to see what part they had in it. It didn't take long for those attitudes to prevail on this COVID ark. Free choice versus welfare for all citizens. Those became the battle cries, weren't they? You remember hearing those on the COVID ark. Eventually, many people turned masking and vaccines into political statements. The lines began to be drawn. As time went on, the views became more strident. When the ark rested on Mount Ararat, I was wondering whether things changed on the ark, right? Whether it had that moment that will finally be safe or not. One of the most challenging parts of the COVID flood has been the moments when we thought that it was going to be over. Remember those? Remember, rates would be down. People were starting to go out. And then all of a sudden, boom, another variant. I remember last year, you all remember this. We were ready to come back to services. All of us, we felt so good about it. And then a whole different variant, Omicron, hits us. Changed the game plan. The COVID gates were opened up again. The flood waters came rushing in. I'll not let them tell me what to do. Those were the fighting words that people would argue about. They're not following the science. Became shouts of warfare. Climate in the COVID ark got ugly, didn't it? I wondered about Noah and his family, if they had disagreements when they got on the ark. Right? Did they fight about who had to clean up after the animals? Right? Did they create a caste system of who would get the preferential jobs and who had to go down and clean up all of that excrement? Were they appreciative for being saved, or did they just complain about everything taking place and that it took so long? Did they argue over who would be the first step out of the ark? I wondered if at some point that some of them are ready to jump off the ship, but actually, I wondered more whether they were actually prepared to throw others overboard. Isn't that what the COVID ark felt like? For us, I think it's about 6 months ago, probably 2 years into the COVID ark, that I think we felt like it was settled on Mount Ararat. That people thought we have a chance now. Even the rates of infection were up, but the death rates were down. Some on the COVID ark argued that they could see land. Others couldn't see anything. Noah sent out the raven and the doves, but we just wanted off the COVID ark. Even if we weren't ready, we just wanted off. Some would not be told to stay on the COVID ark, and others were just claustrophobic and needed to get off. And so people began to depart that COVID ark, but that's not the end of it, because the people that got off the ark were yelling at the people on the ark, "You're wrong." And the people who were on the ark were shouting out to the others, "No, you're wrong." And somehow, even though people were off of that COVID ark, the conflicts did not end. The current debate in our society is over whether the pandemic has actually ended. There are political considerations. There are science issues. In truth, most of us just want it to be done. Isn't that true? Isn't that what you think? I just want it to be done. And so we began to get off that ark. Yet not everybody is in the same condition getting off that ark. There's some people who are not comfortable here and still home watching, and who, while they have gotten off the ark, are not so comfortable in large groups. Some of you are wearing masks and some of you are not. That's the nature of getting off of this COVID ark. But just because many of us have gotten off that COVID ark doesn't mean the COVID flood is over. We still have to remember that there are some immunocompromised and other at-risk people who for good reason are afraid to exit that ark. How do we acknowledge their legitimate fears and make them comfortable? To forget that COVID still exists and can be harmful even to those who are vaccinated is a dishonor. I'm going to tell you, dishonor these vulnerable people. To ignore the potential harm of the variants is dangerous and reckless. So we must now figure out what to do in this new reality. Isn't that our challenge? How are we going to handle it? Well, the biblical story of the flood does not stop with Noah's flood getting off. If you know the story, there's actually 7 laws of Noah that are given by God to humanity. 7 laws that are going to make it different. Because to go back to the way it was before Noah got on the ark would have been ludicrous. It would have meant repeating the sins of society, not having learned to create the same situation as existed beforehand. These 7 laws that God gave would help to create a social order that did not exist previously. These are the first obligations that humans have towards one another in an attempt to create a post-flood social order. Much like the 10 commandments, by the way, that would come later, these 7 laws are designed to create a good social order for us all. In fact, some of these laws, the first 5 of the Noahide laws, are actually found in the 10 commandments. They're prohibitions against blasphemy, idolatry, forbidden sexual relations, murder, and theft. A 6th one deals with the establishment of courts, which did not exist prior to that. And the final one is a prohibition against eating the blood of a living animal. Now, I know that sounds gross. I know you're wondering, what is that? Right? But prior to the flood, if you don't know, humanity was vegetarian. They did not eat meat, of which my wife, Rhodey, likes to remind me daily in her vegan style of life that I should be living a truly biblical life and going back to those early days. And so what they would do is literally that they would cut off parts of an animal so that it would stay alive, so they could eat of the meat in ancient times. And so once you can eat meat, our tradition says you cannot abuse that animal, right? You cannot do that to an animal in order to satiate your own needs. You have to have consideration of others, even animal life, and we're going to learn from that how to treat each other. So I want to suggest, as we come off the COVID arc, I want to suggest 7 new laws that should motivate us and to drive us in this new world. Some of you are not going to like them, but I'm going to say them anyway. Some of you would have different laws as well, and we can talk about that another time. So here's the first one. Acknowledge the fear that other people have and demonstrate a willingness to compromise, to be able to ameliorate that fear. According to the rabbis, I don't know if you know this, the mezuzah is placed on a home at an angle because of a debate between the rabbis. Right? One rabbi said, you're going to place it in a horizontal place, the same words of the Shema they looked at, because it says, when you lie down, you shall teach them. And the other side said, no. It also says, you shall rise up. So we're going to put it vertically. So what did they do? They decided to put it at an angle as a compromise. The home should be a place of compromise. We need to find that compromise in our society. Number 2, let us demonstrate a new understanding of people who are immunocompromised and their daily struggles of life. Long before the pandemic, we had a congregant who was immunocompromised. He would come to services, sometimes with a mask, sometimes not, but who would not shake hands. He wasn't a germaphobe in that way, but shaking hands could really give him something that could make him sick. And people were uncomfortable that he wouldn't shake hands. Do we have a new understanding of what it means to have people in our society that are immunocompromised? And to treat them with respect and concern? They have that right. Number 3, if you're not feeling well with symptoms usually associated with COVID, take a COVID test. If you feel obligated to go out, do so with a mask. Now, I know some of you disagree about the need for a mask. If any of you, have you been to Japan before? I love the Japanese culture. And what do? They often wear masks out in public, don't they? Why do they do that? They don't do it because they're germaphobes. I learned this. Why do they do it? When they're not feeling well, they put on a mask out of concern for other people. It's about thinking about others. And so, people are going to debate the efficacy of masks. I know that. You're going to find studies on both sides of whether they're going to work or not. But I want to tell you that if you could see somebody with a mask on, and by the way, I'm advocating just in moments of the law here of when people are not feeling well. Because by the way, it's a sign to others around, maybe you shouldn't come so close right now. Maybe I'm immunocompromised, and thank you for letting me know. Number 4, the people you have cut out of your lives during the last 2 years over the issue of COVID, just make sure you want them out of your lives. Make sure that this was a big enough issue and not just the heat of the moment, because there are people that we should bring back into our lives. Number 5, let's continue the medical and healthcare measures and research necessary for vaccinations and treatment for those with COVID, as well as research necessary. This pandemic stuff, Bill Gates predicted this a long time ago about pandemics, and we just have to recognize that we're going to have to live with it, and we've got to provide the resources for that. Number 6, continue to feel the sense of obligation to be part of helping others. You remember the amazing outpouring for people at the beginning of the pandemic who would take things to hospitals, who would find the equipment that was not readily available, that they would show up with food and support. Remember those days? We need to recapture that. We need to remember to be grateful for all those people who are on the front line every day. Didn't we have a new appreciation for the people that worked in the supermarket? For the people who took care of our lives, for police and other medical personnel, we understood and we gave them such gratitude. We need to be able to hold on to that support and the willingness to recognize that we can make a difference in life. We can change. I want to make an addendum to this 6th law. I'm going to add to the sixth law to remember how hard it is to be a teacher. I want to remember, like those of you who are teachers, what an amazing, important job you do. And this pandemic has challenged you. We have some of our ECE teachers here as well, and I want them to know that they do God's work. And we need to elevate all of these people, teachers and others, into a high level of recognition. Finally, the seventh one, be a citizen of the world. We must be aware of the impact that we as individuals have on our community, have on society, and the world at large. And if you think that's not the case, then forget it. Because we have this ripple effect, not only that goes out, but it comes back to get you. It's eventually going to come back. These would be my 7 post-pandemic laws to recognize what we've learned and what we need to change. As I mentioned in my sermon last night, returning should not mean going back to the way we were before. We have to find a better path. Will you return to just who you were before? Or will you have grown from the experience? Will the human contributions to the post-pandemic world be more helpful to sustainability of the planet? Will our actions help to repair the rifts, broken relationships, and polarization of society? So Hasidic teaching that says that the biblical flood was a cleansing process. It was like a ritual bath, a mikveh. The world similarly received that spiritual cleansing, setting the course of history a different way. The mikveh, by the way, interesting enough, has to have 40 se'ah. It's a measure of liquid in the ancient world. 40, as in 40 days of that flood. As we get off the COVID ark, will we have experienced the spiritual cleansing? Will we have learned and grown and know how to do better? The world can only be different when we are different. That's the truth. We have an obligation. We have an opportunity, to be part of that change. I want to wish all of you a Shana Tova for a year of goodness, returning to that world to be better off, to make it better, to have a better year.